There wasn't enough space to sleep, not enough food. We were sitting all night.
We were told in this country that children are treated with humanity and respect, but that's not the experience we had.
I got scabies. I showed the doctors. They just told me not to scratch it.
The testimony of unaccompanied children housed at this immigration facility in Kent, speaking to the Refugee Council a few weeks ago. Stories from within the Manston processing centre paints a grim picture of the conditions in which asylum seekers are held, highlighted in a report today, calling on the Home Office to get a grip of the problems there. The Inspectorate of Prisons inspection in July found that exhausted detainees were forced to sleep on floor mats or wooden benches. Some were prevented from closing the door when using the toilet and weren't allowed outside for fresh air, regardless of the length of detention. But conditions are said to have significantly deteriorated in the 3 months since. This week, the Tory MP for the area said the facility was currently 2.5 times over capacity and inhumane, leading to the watchdog already committing to a swift re-inspection.
We flagged up a number of risks when we reported, when we visited in the summer, and we reported those back to the Home Office. And it seems like now those risks have manifested in some very concerning conditions.
The situation is being blamed on a refusal by the Home Secretary to procure enough accommodation to house processed arrivals. She's also accused of inflaming tensions after describing people arriving in small boats as an invasion.
The public expect us to be tackling this and understand their views. That is what the Home Secretary was articulating, and her job and mine in the months ahead will be to take the difficult steps that we need to address this situation.
But the comments come in the wake of the petrol bomb attack on an immigration facility in Dover last week, which is now being investigated by anti-terror police. Today, the attacker, who later killed himself in his car, was named as 66-year-old Andrew Leake, who police say targeted the facility, driven by some form of hate-filled grievance. The attack, as well as overcrowding, has unnerved those who work at facilities like these.
It's a really tense situation right now. The staff fear a major public order incident that they are not able to deal with, that they will be injured, and that the migrants will be injured. It's a really unpleasant situation.
Just over there, you see it. See the white fence? See through that, under that fern, where the car's just gone by? Yeah. That's the fence.
Trevor Jones lives metres from Manston Immigration Centre. He's sympathetic to those seeking asylum, but deteriorating conditions and overcrowding are a cause for concern.
Not being consulted, I didn't like, because I think that if you live next to one of these things, then it is going to affect you, because psychologically you'll be looking over there, thinking what's going on. I do feel sorry for them. I think we need to help them, but I think the politicians who are dealing with it at the moment need to be given some space to try and sort it out.
It's a crisis the new Prime Minister would have preferred to avoid. Now he has to reconcile talking tough on immigration with the compassion he promised to bring to his government just a week ago.
Anya Pop reporting there from Kent. And in response, the Home Office told us that they do not routinely process unaccompanied asylum claimants at the Manston facility, and that safeguarding minors is their utmost priority. I'm joined now by our policy correspondent, Paul Natmara, who's been investigating conditions at Manston and also looking at the backlog in the immigration system. What have you found, Paul?
Yeah, so look, we've been in contact with someone who works at the Manston Centre, and they revealed detail about what day-to-day is like there. And in short, they say it's, quote, like stepping into another world. So first off, there's been reports that there's been cases of scabies and diphtheria at Manston. Our source tells us, add to that list, COVID, perhaps unsurprisingly, but also monkeypox, of course, that latest infection disease, which the government is fighting to contain. They also describe tensions between different groups of people from different places of the world that end up in the centre. They describe gangs making improvised weapons, saying it's, quote, a tinderbox waiting to explode. Now, given those tensions, given those stresses, they also say that recently £9,000 worth of Xboxes have been delivered to the centre to keep people happy. And they also said that, you've got all these problems: scabies, diphtheria, COVID, monkeypox. There are doctors on site. He actually said, ironically, quote, "Try getting an appointment with your local GP. You're not going to get one because they're all here." Now, of course, we've put all of this to the Home Office. They didn't respond directly to the monkeypox, to the Xboxes. But what they did tell us is that Manston remains resourced and equipped to process migrants securely, and we will provide alternative accommodation as soon as possible. They also said record number of people are arriving to the UK by small boats, and that continues to put the asylum system under incredible pressure, and they urge people not to risk their lives and travel to the UK on those small boats.
Briefly, explain the problems at both ends of the immigration system.
OK, so you've got Manston, which is the sharp end, people coming in, but there are problems throughout the whole system. Look at these numbers. These are numbers that have been provided to the Home Affairs Select Committee. So right now, there is a backlog of 100,000 cases, which the Home Office is dealing with. At present, there are 1,090, they call them decision makers, processing these claims. And by the start of December, that should be about 1,330. However, at the moment, decision makers make 1.3 decisions per week. The aim is there will be 4 decisions per week. They've had trials where it gets up to 2.7. But on those numbers, you are looking at it taking more than a year to cope with just the backlog, let alone the thousands upon thousands of people which are still arriving.
Paul, thanks very much. Well, earlier I spoke to Conservative MP Caroline Noakes, a former immigration minister herself, and began by asking her about claims of that outbreak of monkeypox at the Manston Centre and how that tallies with Downing Street's claim of being a compassionate government.
Well, I think it's really important to reflect that this is a site that was designed for about 1,000 migrants to be processed within 48 hours, not to keep people in for any length of time. And so it's really important that the Home Office takes action to resolve the backlog of applications and to get people into move-on accommodation, or there inevitably will be outbreaks of disease and children not being properly safeguarded. And I think that has to be the first priority.
And when you consider the fact that there are children in there and there are migrants being detained, they want to get out, are there grounds, as we're being told by some lawyers tonight, for legal action against the government on this?
Well, it's crucially important that ministers look at the grounds on which they are detaining people, and we've heard that word used. They are detained, and we also heard the word released used. So I'm not convinced that there are any grounds under which people can be kept at Manston, and I'm not surprised that there is consideration of legal action, which could have very serious cost implications for the Home Office.
So the Home Office might be left with a fat cheque for compensation for people kept in there?
It's perfectly possible that people who have no valid claim for asylum could be in receipt of compensation claims because they've been kept at Manston. Now, look, we want to avoid that, and I think it's important to reflect that this isn't government money. This is taxpayers' money being spent that actually is to no good effect.
Number 10 and ministerial colleagues of the Home Secretary are defending her choice of words about an invasion of migrants on the south coast. What do you think of that language?
I was Immigration Minister for 18 months, and during that time I was very conscious that it wasn't just the words that I used that would be scrutinised, but the tone in which I said them. It's really important that we don't further exacerbate tensions that clearly exist over asylum seekers crossing the channel in small and dangerous craft, and find some solutions going forward, as opposed to trying to exacerbate the tensions that are there.
Is she fueling, support for the far right, do you think?
Well, look, I'm really worried that the language isn't about finding pragmatic solutions that work, that tackle the backlogs, that find appropriate accommodation for people who are in desperate circumstances. And I want the Home Secretary, and indeed the whole of the Home Office, to be able to focus their energies on finding solutions. And I think that has to be the focus.
Plenty of your constituents might think you're a bit of a woolly liberal, and actually they might agree with the idea that there's an invasion on the south coast.
Well, lots of my constituents are very worried about children living in unsafe conditions. It's why yesterday I asked a specific question about safeguarding. I want those children to be safe and looked after. And it's imperative that the Home Office has a duty of care to those individuals and treats them as people, as human beings. It's about time we showed some compassion and understanding of the desperate straits that they're in.
The Home Secretary said yesterday that the system was broken. You've wrestled with this system as Immigration Minister yourself. If the system is broken after 12 years of Conservative government, are voters entitled to blame the Conservatives?
Well, look, we've seen a massive increase in the number of people making these dangerous crossings. So the Home Office is tackling a significant backlog in asylum claims, and I would urge them to look at quick grants of people who we know are coming from countries that we're simply not going to return asylum seekers to. Places like Afghanistan, we're not going to send women and children back there. Iran is another good example, and I think it's absolutely imperative that the Home Office tackles that backlog by having some quick grants and works on the rest of the work in progress that I know that they're trying to get to grips with. But it's important that we reflect there are massively increased numbers. We have to find some solutions that actually work. And I think the programme of quick returns to Albania is evidence of a Home Office that is thinking flexibly when it comes to tackling those who are economic migrants as opposed to those who are fleeing war.
When you talk about quick grants, you mean a sort of automatic assumption that you get asylum if you're coming from Afghanistan or Iran, to name two countries?
Well, yeah, they're two good examples. I think Syria as well. We are simply not going to be in a position to seek to return people to war-torn, dangerous countries. We've seen what the Taliban has done in Afghanistan to the rights of women and girls in education. These are not safe countries to return people to. So it's about time we accepted that and gave quick grants of asylum. We could equally look at making sure that people could get into employment. We know that there are serious shortages in, for example, care work, in HGV drivers. We could be looking at ways that we could make sure that people were economically active here rather than a drain on the taxpayer's purse.
Caroline Noakes there. Well, earlier I spoke to Stuart Luke, a partner at Instalaw Solicitors, working at a different law firm in 2016. He asked Suella Braverman to represent several of their clients as a barrister. I began by asking him what type of barrister she was back then.
She was a real champion for the rights and entitlements of asylum seekers and migrants in the UK. And thanks to the representation she made in those cases she was instructed on, we were able to secure injunctions from the High Court requiring the then Home Secretary to provide immediate accommodation for those that she was advocating on behalf of.
Right. I mean, when you hear her talking about an invasion of migrants on the south coast, how does that strike you?
Well, it strikes me as being in stark contrast to how she advocated for those vulnerable asylum seekers at the bar.
I mean, a lot of people might hear her talking about an invasion. A lot of people very upset and offended by that. But some might be watching and think, well, she's right. And, you know, actually, that is a position that the government will get a lot of votes on.
I think there needs to be a fundamental shift in the way that we look at migration in the UK. We have to accept that migration is here to stay. We also have to look at the controls and the influence that criminal smuggling gangs have when it comes to migration generally. And we have to take steps to bring them to justice. But moreover, I think we have to work with regimes and governments around the world where migration largely comes from to understand the issues that they face and to stop the need for migration. Only then, I think, are we likely to see a shift in the way that numbers are being portrayed and the numbers of migrants that we see coming to Europe and the UK at large.
But the government might say they're trying to find innovative solutions. You know, they might describe, well, she's described sending asylum seekers to Rwanda as her dream. She's thinking radically, and lawyers like yourself are obstructing her. That's what the government might say.
Well, as a Home Secretary, what we expect and what I expect from her as a lawyer is that she acts fairly, humanely, and in accordance with the boundaries of the law. Taking steps such as trying to ship vulnerable migrants and asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda is not, in my view, a lawful and pragmatic approach to dealing with the asylum and immigration system.
You are involved yourself in the legal challenge against the government on that Rwanda policy. Having launched that legal challenge against the government on Rwanda, are you now contemplating similar legal action against the government on the migrants detained in Manston?
I've been contacted by a number of organisations who have concerns about the suitability of accommodation, and we may be looking at the possibility of bringing a challenge in the future if urgent steps are not taken to ensure that the accommodation provided is as per the Home Secretary's legal obligations to those asylum seekers whilst their asylum claims are being processed.
Stuart Luke, thanks very much.